The Bandit's Shadow. Chapter 2. The Elder's Plea. The familiar ache in his chest intensified, a dark premonition of the journey ahead. He had agreed to hunt. He had agreed to face the darkness. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this hunt would demand more of him than he could possibly imagine. The solitary life he had cultivated was about to be irrevocably shattered. He was no longer just Kael the farmer. He was Kael, the reluctant hunter. The bandit's shadow was about to fall upon him, and he had no choice but to step into it. He made his way to his small, solitary dwelling on the edge of the village, a place he'd meticulously kept free of anything that might stir old ghosts. But the ghosts were already stirring, and they were calling him to the hunt. Inside, he moved with a practiced efficiency, his movements devoid of hesitation. The items promised to him in exchange for his tools lay inside. He retrieved the bow from its place above the hearth, the wood smooth and familiar beneath his fingers. It felt foreign, yet deeply ingrained. He strapped a quiver of arrows to his back, each one a potential answer, a potential end. Then, he took out his hunting knife, a sturdy blade he'd honed himself, its edge still sharp, a testament to its purpose. He ran a thumb over the worn leather of its handle, a grim reminder of past hunts, of a past life. He packed a small satchel with dried rations, a water skin, and a flint. As he gathered his meager provisions, he caught sight of his reflection in a shard of polished metal tacked to the wall. The haunted eyes stared back, but now, there was a flicker of something else. Not courage, not yet. But a grim resolve, a stark acceptance of the path laid before him. He stepped out of his cottage and into the fading light, the familiar scent of wood smoke and damp earth filling his lungs. The village was settling into its evening rhythm, but Kael moved with a different purpose. He walked past the familiar thatched roofs, the quiet lanes, towards the edge of the woods that bordered Oakhaven. The familiar path that led into the dense, unforgiving wilderness. He glanced back at the cluster of homes, the heart of the village, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a pang of something akin to regret for the peace he was leaving behind. But the image of Elder Torvin's ravaged face, the desperate plea in his eyes, propelled him forward. He stepped under the canopy of the ancient oaks, the familiar embrace of the forest now feeling more like a suffocating presence. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the village receding, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig under his boot. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to hold a hidden threat. He was a man leaving the known world, venturing into a territory where the rules were different, where survival was a brutal negotiation. He carried with him the weight of his unspoken past, the memory of loss, and now, the tangible burden of Elder Torvin's hope. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, a dark and winding road that would test the limits of his strength, his will, and his very soul. He was stepping into the unknown, and with each stride, he was leaving a part of himself behind. Kael stood on the edge of Oakhaven, the familiar, comforting scent of wood smoke and damp earth suddenly alien. Behind him, the village huddled against the encroaching twilight, a sanctuary he now felt a chilling disconnect from. Before him lay the gnawing darkness of the forest, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place of shadows and things that went bump in the night. Elder Torvin's words still echoed in his ears, a desperate plea that had lodged itself in Kael's own hollow chest, a place that ached with a grief he rarely acknowledged. He clutched the worn leather grip of the bough, the wood smooth and unfamiliar under his calloused fingers. It felt absurd, this exchange. His sturdy hoe, the instrument of his quiet livelihood, traded for a weapon that promised only pain and fear. His meager provisions lay bundled at his feet, a small sack of dried meat, a chunk of hard cheese, a water skin, and a flint and steel. Beside them, a rough-spun cloak, dyed a muted brown, a stark contrast to the muted earth tones of his peasant garb. It was a meager outfit for facing the Blackwood bandits, a name that carried more weight than mere brigands, a name spoken with a mixture of dread and grudging respect for their cunning and cruelty. He'd agreed. The very act felt like a betrayal of his own nature. He was a man who nurtured seedlings, who coaxed life from the soil, not one who brought death. Yet, the image of Torvin's ravaged face, the raw agony in his eyes as he spoke of Alara, had mirrored something deep within Kael, a silent echo of a loss he'd buried beneath years of stoic labor. He hadn't offered to hunt bandits before, not when other children had vanished, not when travelers had gone missing on the king's road. But Alara, the elder's daughter, a symbol of the village's fragile peace, her abduction felt like a tear in the very fabric of their existence. A gust of wind, sharp and cold, snaked through the trees at the forest's edge, rustling the fallen leaves and carrying with it a faint, mournful howl that might have been a wolf or something far worse. Kael shivered, pulling the cloak tighter around his shoulders. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of pine and decay. He was walking into the unknown, armed with little more than a desperate hope and the faint, ignoble scent of fear. He took his first step, then another, the soft loam of the forest floor absorbing the sound of his worn boots. The familiar path leading to the village well and the communal fields was soon lost behind him, replaced by a dense undergrowth that snagged at his worn trousers. The trees, tall and ancient, closed in around him, their branches laced together, filtering the last of the daylight into dappled, shifting patterns on the forest floor. It was a world away from the open sky and the predictable rhythm of village life. Here, every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle of leaves could be a predator, and every snap of a twig a hunter's deliberate step. He moved slowly, deliberately, his senses on high alert. His eyes, accustomed to scanning for blighted crops, now searched for broken branches, disturbed earth, anything out of place. He was a farmer, not a tracker, but the desperation in Torvin's plea had ignited a primal instinct, a raw, unyielding need to right this wrong. He visualized Alara's face, a fleeting image from the village square, a girl with intelligent eyes and a quiet grace. He had to find her. He had to. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to press in, its silence a palpable weight. The cheerful chirping of birds had long since faded, replaced by the unsettling quiet of a place holding its breath. He heard the skittering of a small animal, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of ancient trees groaning under their own weight. Each sound amplified his unease, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was a stranger in this wild place, his ignorance a dangerous liability. He paused, straining his ears. A faint sound, like the distant murmur of voices, tickled the edge of his hearing. He froze, every muscle tensing. Bandits. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He crept forward, his movements as silent as possible, the bow held loosely in his hands, an awkward extension of his own apprehension. The voices grew clearer, punctuated by rough laughter and the clinking of metal. He continued, his pace quickening, his apprehension slowly giving way to a grim determination. The forest seemed to press in on him, the shadows lengthening, distorting familiar shapes into menacing figures. He heard the snap of a twig behind him, a sharp, sudden sound that froze him in his tracks. He spun around, bowstring taut, his breath catching in his throat. Two figures emerged from the gloom, their faces obscured by the deepening twilight and the rough hoods of their cloaks. They were rough-looking men, their movements surly, their eyes glinting with a predatory awareness. They carried crude knives, and the insignia they wore, a stylized raven's feather, was unmistakable. Blackwood's men. Lost, farmer, the taller one sneered, his voice like gravel. His companion chuckled, a low, guttural sound. Kael's grip tightened on the bow. His training, meager as it was, kicked in. He remembered the few lessons his grandfather, a retired hunter, had given him years ago. Don't reveal your weakness. Don't let them corner you. Just passing through, Kael replied, his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He kept his eyes on their hands, on their weapons. This ain't your path, boy, the other man said, taking a step forward. We're hunting. And you're in the way. He saw it then, the glint of steel, the predatory crouch. They weren't just questioning him, they were preparing to move. The farmer in him screamed to yield, to apologize, to beg. But he didn't wait. With a surge of adrenaline he hadn't known he possessed, Kael drew back the bowstring, an arrow finding its mark with a sickening thud. The first man stumbled back, a gasp escaping his lips. The second, momentarily stunned, lunged forward. Kael lowered the bow, drew the hunting knife from his belt, a tool he usually reserved for field dressing game, and met the lunge. The clash of steel was sharp and brutal. Kael felt a searing pain in his arm as the bandit's knife grazed him, but he twisted, his own blade finding purchase in the man's side. The bandit cried out, stumbling back, clutching his wound. Kael didn't hesitate. He raised the bow, notched another arrow, and released. The shot was true. The forest fell silent again, save for the ragged breaths of the two fallen men. Kael stood, his chest heaving, his arm throbbing. He looked at his hands, smeared with blood, the familiar texture of soil replaced by the coppery tang of his own making. This was not the quiet existence he knew. This was something else. Something dangerous. He knelt beside the fallen men, his stomach churning. He found no coin, no valuables that would suggest a ransom was their primary concern. But on the taller bandit's belt, he found a small, crudely carved wooden raven, its wings spread in flight. The symbol. Silas Blackwood's mark. He'd found more than just the trail. He'd found proof. And he'd shed his first layer of innocence in the process. The weight of the bow, once alien, now felt like an extension of himself, a grim necessity in this unforgiving new path. He had to keep moving. Elara was out there. And so was Silas Blackwood.